Hi everyone, today we will study the subject biology, and in this video we will try to cover the unit called characteristics and classification of living organisms. So in this video we will try to see few things. First, we will see classification of organisms. Then we will try to see the binomial system and species, and we will see the features of some organisms and 5 kingdom classification. So these are the things that we are going to study today in this video. So let's start. So first let's try to understand that what is the concept of classification and why are we using this classification system. So in simple words, if I try to explain it, we can say that there are many different types of organisms are living on the earth, right? So these organisms are of different types. If we talk about as a whole, so they can be unicellular and multicellular. So all these organisms are of different types. Their body organization is whole different. So we can say that organisms can be classified into the groups by features that they share. Which kind of features? So we can say that their body organization, some particular characters, etc. So depending on these features, the organisms can be classified, right? If we talk about just the number of cells, so depending on this feature, the organisms are classified into two parts. The first are unicellular organisms and second are multicellular organisms. So we can say that the classification system of classifying organism, it classifies organisms. So we can say the classification system classifies the organisms in the basic idea of classification system is basic two things. First, it classifies the organisms in a systemic way. Systemic way, that means that it starts from the beginning and ends on the latest point. So it reflects the evolutionary relationships between the organisms. So we can easily understand that what was the first point at which the particular organisms arose, what happened next to their body, and how they evolved to a particular system that they are right now. So this is how organisms classification helps them to understand in a better way. Systemic way helps us to understand and study them in a perfect manner. Now, when we classify organisms, so there are different ideas on depending on which we classify the organisms. So let's talk about what we did before or in the first stage. So before, in the earlier stage, while organisms were classified, so they were classified based on their similar looks and features. So what will happen to the twins? Right, they have the similar looks and similar features, so we cannot classify them. And this thing was based on morphology. Morphology means their looks and some features. So initially we classified organisms on the basis of their morphology, but it didn't work out for us. So we got a new idea. Right now we are using or we are analyzing organisms' DNA sequence, protein and amino acid sequence to classify them. Now each organisms have very specific DNA, protein and amino acid sequence. So depending on that, we can easily classify different organisms into different groups, and it becomes very easy to study them. Now, if I talk about that, every organism has a specific scientific name based on binomial system that is internationally agreed. So if I want to call some particular organism, so I have to call it by the scientific name when I'm talking about science. So why do we need any scientific name? Can't we call it by just the normal name that we are using? No. Let's take the example. If I take the example of pea plant, that is the common name of that plant, I call the pea plant of a particular plant which is found inside the area which is near to my country or my particular surrounding. So I call that plant as a pea plant. But it is definitely not necessary that the people who are staying in the other part of the world will also call this plant as a pea plant. It may have some other name. So if I move to that place of the world where pea plant is known by some other name, I won't be able to get this plant. So to remove or to clarify all these issues, some international agencies decided that they will give a scientific name to each organism. If we talk about pea plant, then its scientific name is Pisum sativum. So in the any part of the world, when I go and ask for Pisum sativum, I will always get the pea plant. So this is how scientific names helps us to know or to call that particular organism or to understand it in a better way without any more confusion. And what is binomial system? So we can say that in this binomial system, the name is made up of two parts. The first part is genus. The first part shows, if I talk about Pisum sativum, so Pisum shows the genus, the generic term for closely related species. So the Pisums involve some species which are closely related with each other. And what are species? So the sativum is the name of species. So species is a group of organisms that can reproduce to produce fertile offsprings. So sativum are the group of organisms that can reproduce, and after reproduction they produce the fertile offspring. So here this fertile word is very important. If I talk about, let's take the cat and dog. And if I do the reproduction between these two organisms, I won't get any fertile offspring. So there is no use of it, right? So species are those organisms which do the reproduction and they give the fertile offsprings. So by naming them, we use these two terms, genus and species. So scientific name involves two things, that is genus name and species name. And as a whole, the scientific name is also called as binomial system or binomial name. Now let's try to know that what is binomial name and what are the rules for binomial nomenclature. So when we write binomial name, we have to type in italics. But while we write it by our hand, if I talk about Pisum sativum, so we have to underline the name. The next is the first letter of the word is capitalized. Here the P is capitalized and the S, that is sativum, is lowercase. So if I want to write the scientific name in binomial name system, then I will write like this. The G of the first word is capitalized and the S of the second word is lowercase. So this is how scientific name or binomial nomenclature name is written. The next is how binomial nomenclature works. So bi means two and nomial means names. And nomenclature means the system of naming. So if I talk about Homo sapiens, so it is the example of binomial nomenclature. Homo includes the genus where different similarly attached organisms with each other are involved, and sapiens are those organisms or the group of those organisms which reproduce with each other, and after reproduction they provide the fertile offsprings. So this is the example of binomial name. Now let's see that what are the features of organisms. So we know that all organisms are made up of cells, and they have certain common features in common. Which kind of features? So every organism is made up of cell, and each cell is made up of some basic thing. The first, cytoplasm, which is inside the cell, which is jelly-like substance where all the metabolic reactions occurs. Cell membrane, which is the outermost membrane in animal cell, or the outer membrane in plant cells. After that, cell wall is present, so it is responsible for enter and removal of some particular compounds in the or outside the cell. DNA, which contains some genes which is present in nucleus and which is responsible for heredity. Ribosomes, which are responsible for protein synthesis, and enzymes, which are responsible to carry out some reactions which takes place in the cytoplasm. So these are the common features that are shared by the all organisms which have cells, because these common features are the common features of cells. Now when we can want to organize organisms, so we can say that we can organize every single organism into 5 main categories called kingdoms. So there are 5 kingdoms, and each organisms on which is residing on the earth is classified in this 5 kingdoms. So which are they and how this functions? Let's see. So this is the 5 kingdom classification, and this system was given by Whittaker. So if I ask you in exam that who gave the 5 kingdom classification system, then the answer is Whittaker. So he classified organisms into 5 kingdoms. The first kingdom was Protista. So here he includes protozoas and some algae. In the kingdom of Monera, the bacteria were included. There are many different types of bacteria, right? We already know it. Then the kingdom fungi, where mushrooms, yeast, molds, and some other unicellular and multicellular fungi are involved. Then the kingdom plants, where different kind and different types of plants and trees are involved. And kingdom of animals, where different insects, squids, different animals and humans and all those organisms are involved. So this is how the Whittaker, who was a scientist, he gave the particular system. Depending on that particular system and rules, he divided all the living organisms in Protista, Monera, fungi, prokaryotes and eukaryotes groups. So this is the 5 kingdom classification. Now let's see that what are the criteria which were used for 5 kingdom classification. So the first criteria is cell structure complexity. If the particular organism has the complex cell structure or not, depending on that they are classified. If the organism has complex cell structure, then that is called as eukaryotic organism. And if it has simpler structure, then that is called as prokaryotic cell. In prokaryotic cells, no high 5 cell organelles are seen. But in eukaryotic cells, very grown and matured or cell organelles are seen. So they have complex materials and they have complex systems. The next criteria is complexity of body structure and structural organization. So depending on how the body structure is of organism and what is the structural organization, the organisms are divided into unicellular and multicellular organisms. Uni means they have only one cell in their whole body structure, and multicellular, they have more than one cells. So this is how they are classified. The third criteria is nutrition mode. On which type or how the organism is obtaining its nutrition. So there is photoautotrophy, that means plants that use photomint light, and autotroph, that means they make their own food. Absorptive heterotrophy, that means the fungi that absorb the things from the plants or some other animals. So they absorb things, that's why they are called as absorptive heterotrophy. Heterotrophy means those organisms which are dependent on autotrophic organisms or other kind of organisms. Ingestive heterotrophy, that means the organism that ingests something, like animals and humans, we ingest something by using our mouth. So that is the mode of nutrition to us. So this criteria was also used in the classification of 5 kingdom classification. And then ecological lifestyle, that how the organisms are living in their ecological habitats. So they are producers, plants, decomposers like fungi, and consumers, they are called as animals. So depending on how they live and what they eat, they are classified. And last is their phylogenetic relationships. That means either they are prokaryotes or they are eukaryotes. So these are the different criteria that were used to make the 5 kingdom classification. These are the properties of 5 kingdoms that I have listed here. If I talk about Monera, Protista, fungi, Plantae and Animalia, so they are their cell type, their cell organization, the presence or absence of cell wall, the nutritional class and mode of nutrition. Everything was classified in the 5 kingdom system, so you can easily get it from here. The next part is the animal kingdom. So this was all about plant kingdom and as a whole each kingdom. Now let's become specific about animal kingdom. So animal kingdom is divided into 2 major groups. Which 2 major groups? So it is divided into invertebrates, there are non-chordates, and vertebrates that have the chordates, or they are called as chordates. Invertebrates, what are these organisms? So invertebrates do not possess a vertebral column or backbone. That means those organisms who lack the backbone which is present in human body or any other animal's body are called as invertebrates or non-chordates. In simple words, invertebrates don't possess the backbone or vertebral column. While we talk about vertebrates, so they have vertebral column or backbone present inside their body. So this is how we classify different animal kingdom into 2 major groups. Now, if we talk about classification of animals, so animal kingdom is classified into different phylums. They include vertebrates, annelids, mollusks, nematodes, and arthropods. And they are different classes. So this is the classification system that how organisms are classified in animal kingdom. Then we see some characteristics of living organisms. So we can say that when we talk about animals, there are basically two different types, vertebrates and invertebrates. So these are the characteristics of vertebrates and the organisms which are involved in it, and invertebrates and those organisms characteristics. So as a whole, vertebrates includes reptiles, fish, amphibians, birds and mammals. So they have different characteristics, so it is mentioned here. And invertebrates, they lack the backbone, right? So these are different types of invertebrates and the different characteristics. So this you can also refer this. These are the characteristics of different animals. Now let's see that what are the different kinds of classification. We just saw one, that is 5-kingdom classification. But there are many different types of classification. What are they? So let's start it. The first is 2-kingdom classification. This was the first classification which was given by Carl Linnaeus. You have to remember this, and he gave this classification system in 1758. So in this classification system, we classified organism in just two systems. First is Plantae and second is Animalia. There was no other groups like Protista, Monera, fungi, nothing. He classified all the living organisms in just two parts, that is Plantae and Animalia. So this was the first classification. Second, after that, 3-kingdom classification system came. Here the living organisms were classified on the basis of unicellularity and multicellularity. That means if the organism has only one cell in its body structure or more than one cell in its body structure. So depending on this, the organisms were classified in 3 kingdoms. The first was Protista, which included algae, fungi and bacteria. The Plantae or Metaphyta, that included multicellular plants, and Animalia or Metazoa, which included multicellular animals. And this 3-kingdom classification system was given by Ernest Haeckel in the year 1866. So you have to remember this. So Ernest divided the organisms into 3 groups, Protista, Plantae and Animalia, depending on their unicellularity and multicellularity. So this was the second classification system. Then came 6-kingdom classification, which was given by Carl Woese in 1977. So he divided organisms in 6 kingdoms. The first is Protista, where he included eukaryotic, unicellular and multicellular organisms. In eubacteria, he involved unicellular prokaryotic bacteria. In archaeobacteria, there are involved unicellular prokaryotic bacteria, and Plantae, where multicellular eukaryotic plants are involved. In Animalia, multicellular eukaryotic animals are involved, and in fungi, multicellular eukaryotic fungus are involved. So this is the 6th kingdom classification. This is the recent one. So these are the possible questions which can be asked from the things that we just cleared. The first is, what is the binomial nomenclature? So binomial nomenclature is a system of naming the organisms where we use two names. Which two names? The name of genus and species. So this is called as binomial nomenclature. Next is, what are the common features in organisms? So we just saw that all the organisms have the common cell in them, and the cell's common features are there. So we can list the cytoplasm, nucleus, DNA, cell membrane, etc. as the common features of organisms. And also, if you remember, we studied something about Mrs. Grain, right? So these are also the common features which are seen in all the organisms. Next is, what are the characteristics of different classes in animal kingdom? So we already enlisted this thing in the tables and images that we just saw in the previous slide. So you can enlist all these characteristics and special features that were mentioned in that image, right? So these are the characteristics of different classes of animal kingdom. And last is different kinds of classification. So they are different kinds of classification, where we saw that two kingdom classification is there, three kingdom classification is there, five kingdom classification is there, and six kingdom classification is there. So these are possible questions which can be asked from the material or the thing that we just studied today. I hope I made you understand these things in a better way. Thank you so much for watching this video, and for more videos like this you can visit WASSCE.com. Till we meet again, take care, stay safe. Thank you. Bye bye.